The coffee cup sat in front of me like a loaded gun. I should have known something was wrong the moment Alexander handed it to me with that practiced smile of his. The same smile he'd worn when he told me my promotion was just luck and that I shouldn't let success go to my head. The same smile he'd given me 3 months ago when I'd woken up in the hospital after what the doctors called food poisoning. But it was the smell that made me freeze. Sweet, with an undertone of something sharp and chemical. Like bitter almonds. I'd learned about cyanide in my chemistry classes 15 years ago. The professor had made a point about the distinctive smell, how some people could detect it and others couldn't. I'd always been one of the lucky ones with the genetic ability to smell it. Lucky. What a joke. Drink up, honey, Alexander said, settling into his chair across from me. His mother, Eleanor, sat between us at the dining table, her thin lips pursed in their usual disapproval. She'd been living with us for 6 months now, ever since her accident that left her with a broken hip and a convenient excuse to monitor my every move. It's getting cold, Eleanor added, her voice sharp as glass. Alexander went to such trouble to make it special for you. I lifted the cup to my lips, but didn't drink. Instead, I studied my husband's face over the rim. His eyes were too bright, too focused on my mouth. His hands were clenched on the table, knuckles white. I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing abruptly. I'll be right back. Alexander's face flickered with something I couldn't quite name. Panic? Disappointment? Of course, dear, he said, but his voice was strained. I walked to the bathroom, my mind racing. 3 months ago, I'd been rushed to the hospital with severe stomach pain and vomiting. The doctors couldn't find a cause, but I'd been violently ill for days. It had happened right after I'd been offered the senior partnership at the law firm where I worked. The same partnership Alexander had been passed over for twice. Before we rush back in, please tell us in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from, and if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe, it helps support our channel. Enjoy listening. 2 weeks before that, I'd found a strange receipt in Alexander's wallet. A receipt for a chemical supply company. When I'd asked him about it, he'd laughed it off, saying he was thinking of starting a photography hobby. But I'd never seen any photography equipment in our house. Last week, I'd noticed Eleanor going through my laptop while I was in the shower. When I confronted her, she'd claimed she was just trying to check her email. But Eleanor had her own computer. She'd never needed to use mine before. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked back, pale and drawn. I'd lost weight over the past few months. Not from dieting, but from a constant low-level nausea that I'd attributed to stress. Stress from the promotion, from Eleanor's constant presence, from Alexander's increasingly cold behavior. But what if it wasn't stress at all? I returned to the dining room, my decision made. Alexander and Eleanor were whispering together, their heads close. They separated quickly when they saw me. Everything all right? Alexander asked, his smile too wide. Perfect, I said, sitting back down. I picked up my coffee cup again, but this time I had a plan. Eleanor, you look tired, I said, turning to my mother-in-law. Would you like some coffee? Alexander made plenty. Oh, I couldn't, she said, but I could see the longing in her eyes. Eleanor loved coffee, but Alexander rarely made it for her. I insist, I said, standing up. Let me get you a cup. I walked to the kitchen, my heart pounding. In the cabinet, I found another mug, identical to mine. I poured coffee from the same pot Alexander had used, but this coffee smelled normal. No bitter almonds. No sweet chemical undertone. I returned to the dining room with the fresh cup and set it in front of Eleanor. Then, in one fluid motion, I switched our cups while pretending to adjust my napkin. There you go, I said, settling back into my chair. Enjoy. Eleanor's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Thank you, dear. Alexander, you should make coffee for your mother more often. Alexander was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. pure, undiluted hatred. "Anna," he said carefully, "why don't you drink your coffee? You said you were tired." "I am tired," I agreed, lifting the cup that now held Eleanor's harmless coffee. "This smells wonderful." I took a sip. It tasted like coffee. Nothing more, nothing less. Eleanor, meanwhile, was drinking deeply from the cup that had been meant for me. "This is delicious," she said. "What's your secret, Alexander?" Alexander's face was gray now, his eyes darting between Eleanor and me. "Mom, maybe you should." "Should what?" Eleanor interrupted. "Finally get some appreciation from my son? About time." She finished half the cup in 3 long swallows. I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. 15 minutes later, Eleanor's hand began to tremble. She set down the cup with a clatter. "I don't feel well," she said, her voice weak. "What's wrong?" I asked, leaning forward with feigned concern. Eleanor's face was flushed, her breathing rapid. "I feel hot. Dizzy." Alexander had gone completely white. "Mom, how much did you drink?" "Most of it," Eleanor gasped. "Why? What's?" She never finished the sentence. Her body convulsed, and she pitched forward, her chair toppling backward as she hit the floor. "No!" Alexander screamed, dropping to his knees beside her. "You weren't supposed to drink that." The words hung in the air like a confession. I stood slowly, pulling my phone from my pocket. "I'm calling 911, I said calmly. "Anna, wait," Alexander grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, shaking him off. "You've been poisoning me for months. Small doses, not enough to kill me, just enough to make me sick. To make me weak. To make everyone think I was having a nervous breakdown from the stress of my promotion." Alexander's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The coffee was supposed to be the last dose. Just enough to put you in the hospital again, to make you look unstable. The firm would have reconsidered the partnership. And you would have gotten it instead," I finished. "But you got greedy. You decided to make it lethal this time." Eleanor was convulsing on the floor, foam at her mouth. I dialed 911, speaking clearly into the phone. "I need an ambulance. My mother-in-law has been poisoned with cyanide." As I gave the address, I watched Alexander fall apart. He was sobbing now, trying to hold Eleanor's head, begging her to stay conscious. "She helped you," I said quietly. "Didn't she? She was the one going through my things, looking for evidence that I was becoming unstable. She was the one who suggested I needed to be handled before I embarrassed the family." Alexander looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. "She said you were getting too big for your britches. That you needed to be brought down a peg. But this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to. Drink the poison meant for me," I said. "I know." The paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked on Eleanor with professional efficiency, but I could see in their faces that it was too late. The convulsions had stopped. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. "What did she ingest?" one of the paramedics asked. "Cyanide," I said. "It was in the coffee." The paramedic looked at me sharply. "How do you know that?" "Because it was meant for me," I said. But I switched cups. While the paramedics worked, I found myself thinking about the past 6 months. How Eleanor had moved in right after my promotion, claiming she needed help recovering from her fall. How she'd been so interested in my work schedule, my eating habits, my stress levels. How she'd been so quick to suggest that maybe I was pushing myself too hard, that maybe I should consider stepping back from the partnership. How Alexander had been so supportive of his mother's concerns. So quick to agree that I seemed unstable, that I needed to take care of myself. They'd been working together all along. The perfect team. The devoted son and the concerned mother-in-law, both worried about poor Anna's mental health. But they'd underestimated me. They'd forgotten that I was a lawyer, trained to notice details, to build cases from fragments of evidence. They'd forgotten that I'd spent 15 years learning to trust my instincts, even when everyone else told me I was wrong. Eleanor died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Alexander was arrested at the scene after I showed the police the receipt I'd photographed from his wallet, the emails I'd recovered from his laptop, and the small bottle of potassium cyanide I'd found hidden in his darkroom supplies. The trial was a sensation. The local news called it the coffee cup murder. The prosecution painted a picture of a man so consumed by professional jealousy that he'd been willing to slowly poison his wife to destroy her career and, ultimately, her life. Alexander's defense tried to claim it was an accident, that he'd been planning to kill himself and Eleanor had drunk the poison by mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. The months of small doses I'd been receiving, documented by my medical records. The pattern of my illnesses coinciding with my professional successes. The texts between Alexander and Eleanor, discussing my deteriorating mental state and how to handle the situation. I testified for 3 days, laying out the case methodically. I showed the jury how Alexander had been isolating me, making me doubt my own perceptions. How Eleanor had been his partner in gaslighting me, making me believe that my suspicions were paranoia. Alexander was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. But the real victory came 6 months later, when I won the biggest case of my career. A class-action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company that had been covering up the side effects of their drugs. The case that established me as one of the top trial lawyers in the state. The same case that Alexander had been trying to sabotage by accessing my files through Eleanor's searches of my laptop. I stood in the courtroom as the verdict was read, feeling the weight of justice like a physical thing. The jury awarded my clients $200 million in damages. The pharmaceutical company's stock price plummeted. 3 executives were arrested. After the trial, I stood on the courthouse steps, facing the reporters and cameras. Someone asked me how it felt to win such a major case so soon after my personal tragedy. It feels like justice, I said. Not just for my clients, but for everyone who's ever been told they're imagining things, that they're too sensitive, that they can't trust their own instincts. I paused, looking out at the crowd of reporters and onlookers. My husband tried to poison me because he couldn't stand that I was succeeding where he had failed. He tried to make me doubt myself, to make me believe I was weak and unstable. But here's what he didn't understand: being targeted doesn't make you weak. Surviving makes you stronger. That night, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee from the same mug I'd switched with Eleanor's that day. The coffee tasted like victory. Like survival. Like the future I'd almost lost. I thought about Alexander, sitting in his prison cell, probably still convinced that he'd been the victim of circumstances beyond his control. Still unable to understand that his downfall had been his own arrogance, his own inability to see me as anything more than an obstacle to be removed. I thought about Eleanor, who'd died believing she was helping her son eliminate a problem. Who'd never understood that the real problem was their own toxic ambition. And I thought about myself, the woman who'd been smart enough to trust her instincts, strong enough to survive, and patient enough to wait for justice. The coffee was perfect. No bitter almonds. No sweet chemical undertone. Just coffee, dark and strong and honest. Just like me. 3 years later, I opened my own law firm. The nameplate on my door reads Anna Chen, attorney at law. Below it, in smaller letters, it says, "Trust your instincts." I keep the coffee cup from that day on my desk. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who claim to love you. Sometimes the greatest threat comes from inside your own home. But mostly, it reminds me that I'm still here. Still strong. Still fighting. And I always will be.